Welcome to another writing workshop with a Creative Writing Meetup that is hosted in AltspaceVR, where we meet in virtual reality. We write in the real world, but we meet in VR. And my name is Laurel, and I'm here with just a quick summary of one of our last workshops. Remember, the Creative Writing Meetup that happens in Altspace is a supportive and creative environment. So you come, share, we work on prompts, we learn lessons, we just have a really good time for an hour, usually on Mondays. And we have a lot of other writing events and creative events as well. So come join us. I'm going to talk about world building in this workshop we did last week. And world building is the art of building the virtual world around your story and looking at how the world around your characters influences your characters, but also how your characters influence that world. And when you're working with developing world building as a writer, ask yourself, what is your story's world? Now, many people phrase that question of what's your world's story, but I want you to think about it as what's the world that's attached to your story, that your stories creates this world by all the details that are in and around your characters. So think about who, what, where, why, when, how, all those details. Dig into geography. Place names are fascinating. Maybe they were named by the natives, and that's just a name that's been inherited and brought forward, and maybe the spelling changed. But there's a historical or native affiliation associated with it, or maybe it was named after people who found the place or people who died there. Some kind of significance. And those place names are not just countries and cities and towns, but they boil down to street names and landmarks and other parts of the geography in and around your characters. And consider making a map. You'll often find maps in many different books and science fiction to historical, all a variety of them. So make your own map. How far away is it between places? So that there's a sense of time or distance that is traveled by your characters. Maybe it's close, maybe it's far away, so that you can add that into your story. Think about seasons and weather that's attached to those. That's part of the story. Your story's world has temperatures, it has storms, it has other things going on, and the demographics of the world. What's the population? Is it tribal? Is it not? Is it people of different colors or different ages? What's those demographics? And the politics can be interesting. And trust me, your character is influenced by politics, whether you know it or not. For example, right now, I live in the United States, but I just had some trouble with a business that I had to deal with the issues going on with Brexit. So here I am in my little world, going along with my thing, and what's happening over in the UK and Europe is impacting me living on the west coast of the United States, as far away as I could possibly be from what's going on in Britain. So the politics and the governments, as well as the society and the culture, influences the character, helps to determine what a character will do in your story, and the pressures and conflicts that may be around them. Are they in conflict with society or conflict with their culture? Or maybe they're in conflict with themselves over these issues. I don't know. Lots of things to explore. So keep these things in mind as you write. We did some experimentation, testing, playing around with building worlds like this example world, a total fictional world of 1978 Los Angeles, California, and the place is a disco nightclub. And it was quite fascinating discussion as we talked about the different clothes that were in vogue, all the hairspray, poofed up hair, and the constant dancing, the bright lights, the glass mirror balls, where everybody had to know the dance. But then we also looked at part of the culture of Los Angeles in that time period, 1978. You had, we were just coming out of the 60s, and so there were still drug issues, and there were a lot of political things that were happening in response to that. And it was just the beginning of the Reagan era, where in response to the 60s, the ultra-conservative people moved right into controlling corporate and brought their desires right into the government and started dictating religious beliefs and standards and policies, even though at that time period their rights were being finally given through massive, massive grassroots political drive for, abortion and for birth control access and rights for women and civil rights in general, there was a government pressure of conservatism that was rising up and trying to stomp down on a lot of the civil rights in California and throughout the United States and North America and beyond. But we're focusing on this world in LA and in and around a disco nightclub. And people suggested the drug era because that was when sniffing cocaine was very prevalent and it was all over the place. And that was, just a recreational thing you did, but it was also a deadly thing and led to some really awful, awful paths that some characters could take. There was money changing hands freely. You had the illusion of wealth and beauty and class with all of the surface stuff, but there was always this underbelly going on. And then being in LA, you have the entertainment industry added on top of it and all the stuff happening with there. So that was fascinating discussion of what might have influenced the characters at in and around a disco nightclub in LA in 1978. We also looked at another example, staying with California, the 1952 earthquake in Kern County. It was a magnitude 7.7. Terribly devastating, not as bad as some others, but it was pretty bad. And it was felt from San Diego to Reno. And in today's US dollars, it was $575 million in damage. There was railroad tunnels that were actually cracked and damaged, and railroads were bent as the earth shifted and moved in and around all these things. Buildings were crumbled, fell down on cars, fell down on people. So right there, we had a world building issue in our discussion. People were driving. They had cars. It's fairly recent after World War II. So the economy and industry was on a huge boom, and the film industry down in California was going a million miles an hour, producing massive films, and television was just moving right in, just starting in its prime, coming out of, as everybody had a television by this time in their home, not just radios. So it was about industry and technology that was evolving, and all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, this huge, vast area of California had no electricity. But what was fascinating in our discussions about building this fictional world that we were playing with, it was still at the cusp of when people still took care of themselves. They still knew how to manage their lives and take care of themselves without being reliant upon electricity and on water and grocery stores and all those things. Those were still early days. So when we have our characters in that kind of a world, we have to think about what's their reliance upon the things that we now take for granted. And what was their issues for things that they took for granted when they lost access to that. Today, we have cell phones and instant communication and wireless and all these things. In those days, how long did it take for information to move with no electricity? With no ability, the roads were damaged and the tunnels, people had to walk to convey messages. So you have not only the influence of the world that you build within the earthquake area, but you also have the world outside of the earthquake area where communication was really slow and information was not passed out to these people in the prime, fast, high-speed way with social media today. So what was going on with those characters? Think about that. We had, what a fun discussion we had on this one. And then we looked at World War II, circa 1942, London, at a time when it was being bombed by the Germans. Now, this iconic picture of the milkman walking through the rubble is brilliant. That is a very wonderful, wonderful tribute to the courage that life kept going on. That if you didn't keep doing whatever it was to normalize life, then the enemy was winning. So that's a wonderful attitude of what was going on in that world, of the people incorporating races down to bomb shelters and having a home right next to theirs destroyed while theirs was still standing, being a part of the day-to-day lives of these people. about the struggles of when they had to ship their kids out to the north and other places to keep them safe, and how hard that was to be away from their children, and how hard it was for the children. So we have the influences of decisions that were made by the government to protect its society from what was happening, and those who could and those who couldn't, and the impact of all this. And then what was it like living in there? How'd they feel about the Germans? That's something, these people didn't ask for war. They didn't ask for Hitler to come into power and to attack them, but they needed to support their government. So they were influenced by these things that were outside of them, and yet they needed to maintain whatever form of sanity they needed. Now, again, depends on what your characters are doing. If your characters are spies for the German government and they're living there in London while it was being bombed, that's a different story. But the influences of the world in around them at that time, the access again to technology and services, and what they took for granted and how that was shifted and changed by what was happening, is part of telling the story of your story. Again, what's your story's world? What does that look like? Take time to write that up, especially now with NaNoWriMo on, the National Novel Writing Month. Take time to write out the backstory of your world. Look at the geography, the season, the weather, the demographics, the politics, the society, the culture, and how they influence your character, and how your character is influenced, can influence them. Also, look at the world from the perspective of your character, because they may have a border in their world that is a city block. That's all they know. They've never been outside of it. If they have, it was scary. Well, what happens if they actually leave that comfort zone? What changes them? Is your story going to take them outside of that? Or does the story exist within that really closely bordered area? So what is their view of the world around them? And think about what that perspective is. From the perspective of an American citizen today, you got the Republicans versus the Democrats, and then the independents going, "We hate you both." So you have all kinds of possibilities, but how does your character see that world around them? And then look at how the other characters in your story also see the world around them. And if it differs from your main character, that's a point of conflict. If it's with them, but that view is challenged by both of them, that's another point of conflict. So how is that perspective challenged, as well as how do they see? And then the world beyond, like we talked about. And then the issues of the language, the history, the society, and the culture. Again, that's a perspective. Or do they come from a mixed background? Therefore, they have maybe one parent was Mexican and another one was German, and now they're living in Canada or the United States. And how does that, the language issues and that past historical sense of identity, influence their perspective of the world around them? And then again, what's that influence on the outside world pushing on top of your characters? So a lot to think about. It's just a really quick overview, but I want you to think about building the world around your characters and building your characters because of that world. How does that world change your characters, and how do your characters change that world? So this is Laurel with the Creative Writing Meetup. You can find more information on our Discord at discord.me/writingvr. And we have some writing tips here at Writers in the Grove, but also check out altvr.com, where you can come join us. You can come in as a guest, or you can come in with a full-blown account. It's totally free, and join us at AltspaceVR. See ya.